New Zealand makes an international legal bid to stop French nuclear tests. Carmen Lawrence warned over attacks on Penny Easton's mother. And the bitter memories linger 50 years after war in the Pacific.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Gina Boon.
Good evening. Diplomatic manoeuvring over nuclear testing in the Pacific took another step today. New Zealand announcing it would take its case against France to the International Court of Justice. Australia is offering what seems less than enthusiastic support, while Paris sees it as little more than an election ploy by the Kiwi Prime Minister. Raymond Dale has our report.
As the French prepared a bomb for testing at Illawarra, the New Zealand Cabinet announced it was charting a course for legal action against the French in the International Court of Justice. However, Prime Minister Jim Bolger admits his chances of success are slim.
It's fair to say that the case is not a strong one. It will be difficult. We're not pretending this is an easy or an open-shut case, but it was the view of the leaders we should, however, leave no option unexplored.
New Zealand will seek an interim order stopping all tests until an environmental impact report can be done. It's reviving a 1973 case against atmospheric testing at Illawarra, but before the World Court made its final decision then, France moved its testing underground, sidestepping any ruling. Australia was part of the court challenge 22 years ago, but this morning Prime Minister Keating said that wouldn't be the case this time.
These things have got to be real rather than cosmetic. We've examined the options. We don't think that the court, as much as we would like to use the court, really presents an option for us.
However, later in the day, Foreign Minister Gareth Evans was suggesting Australia would back New Zealand's challenge, but not reopen its own 1973 case against the French. The nuclear row did not stop national mutual policy holders overwhelmingly approving a takeover by giant French insurance company AXA. Conservationists had urged them to send a protest to Paris by rejecting the billion-dollar bid, but only one shareholder questioned the wisdom of merging with the French.
There will be a global backlash. Is it worth the risk?
The nuclear issue is basically irrelevant.
After 3 hours, National Mutual's board received the endorsement it needed. The new owner in Paris was said to be delighted. Raymond Dale for Nightline.
Things don't appear to be getting any better for Carmen Lawrence. The Health Minister was under fire today from the Eastern Royal Commission and Penny Easton's mother. The reason? Dr. Lawrence's claims about the motives of Barbara Campbell, whose daughter's suicide led to the inquiry.
In Perth, Royal Commissioner Ken Marks warned Dr. Lawrence she'd face contempt proceedings if she continued to publicly criticise the Easton inquiry. And the embattled Health Minister found herself under pressure on another front, following a highly personal attack on Barbara Campbell, the mother of Penny Easton, whose death is at the centre of the Royal Commission.
Well, she ran against me as a political opponent in 1993, so there's a lot of politics tied up in this as well.
Mrs. Campbell says she has only one motive in pursuing the affair.
If she thinks that she can call this, my interest in all this, political, I would like to disillusion her. I want to know why my daughter felt she had to commit suicide.
The federal opposition says Dr. Lawrence should apologise for her comments.
To attempt to destroy the reputation or the motives of the mother of a dead woman is right beyond the pale.
The government says it's standing firm in support of Dr. Lawrence, the Prime Minister denying she'd offered to resign. Mr. Keating was more interested in talking about the Liberal Party's problems and the Crichton-Brown affair.
Noel Crichton-Brown will be as powerful in the WA Liberal Party today as he was a week ago.
The Liberal state executive may have asked Senator Crichton-Brown for his resignation, but he appears to be laughing the whole thing off.
But you're not going to resign, Senator?
Absolutely not. OK.
Senator Crichton-Brown claims he still has a lot of support within the Liberal Party. Laurie Wilson reporting for Nightline.
The political battle in Queensland is not over yet. Labor won last month's election by just one seat, but the Liberals have challenged the outcome in Mundingburra. The ALP, meantime, has lodged a protest against its loss in Greenslopes. Croatia is claiming victory in Krajina, but the battle may not yet be over, with Serbian army tanks heading for the border region. Those continuing to suffer most are the tens of thousands of refugees still facing deadly Croatian vengeance as they flee towards Serb-controlled havens in Bosnia.
Croatia's sweep to liberate territory has brought a dramatic reversal. These men used to run the local government in Petrinje. They fled the Serb rebellion 4 years ago. Now they're coming home, and just in time to ridicule an upcoming Serb election. Those guys are criminals, he says. The Serb army was well entrenched here. This was one of the most important towns in the northern section of what used to be called Krajina, a heavily armed place that put up fierce resistance. Winning this town took a heavy toll. What wasn't destroyed by the fighting, the Serbs looted before they fled, perhaps never to be seen here again.
They will come if they are not afraid.
Would you be afraid if you were a Serb?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
And with good reason. Tens of thousands of Serbs are trekking across the borders looking for safety, from Croatia through northern Bosnia and into Serbia proper. This attack, apparently by a Croatian fighter jet, killed 5 refugees and wounded 15 others. The stories of brutality have a familiar, ominous ring, but this time it is Serbs being brutalized. The Croatian soldiers burned everything, she says. They slaughtered people who stayed behind. Now there are indications the Croatian army, euphoric after the conquest of Krajina, may push into the last Serb enclave on its territory, eastern Slavonia. This time, a column of tanks from Serbia is headed to confront the Croatian army, should it choose to launch a new offensive.
3 people escaped with only minor injuries when a light plane flipped while landing in Western Australia. The single-engine Cutlass was buffeted by strong crosswinds during its descent at an airstrip 500 kilometres southeast of Perth. When it touched the ground, winds toppled it, the plane only coming to a rest when it struck an embankment. The aircraft was badly damaged. The Adelaide Supreme Court has been told a man allegedly drowned his fiancée to gain more than $1 million from forged life insurance policies. Henry Vincent Keogh is accused of killing Anna Cheney in a bathtub 1 month before they were due to marry. On the opening day of the trial, prosecutors claimed Keogh never intended to wed. He is pleading not guilty and remains on bail. The second wife of a Melbourne property developer has been found guilty of conspiring to murder her husband's first wife. The Victorian Supreme Court heard Andrea Michelle Morgan and husband John paid $25,000 to have Robin Morgan killed. But the hitman they found was actually an undercover policeman. The couple wanted full access to $1.3 million in property and custody of 2 children. Andrea Morgan will be sentenced after a psychological examination. John Morgan has already pleaded guilty and will be sentenced later this month. It may end up costing New South Wales taxpayers a lot for the honour of hosting the Olympics in the year 2000, but the chances of the Sydney Games making a loss were dramatically reduced today when the state stitched up a $1 billion deal for the American television rights.
If you thought gold was the richest prize in the Olympics, then consider the TV rights. $1 billion. That's the price NBC will pay for the right to broadcast 2.5 weeks of sport to North America only.
They represent fundamentally a great vote of confidence in the Sydney Games.
The bid was $184 million above expectations, so high it was accepted without allowing competing networks a look in. Sydney Games chief Gary Pemberton brokered the deal in New York overnight.
It's a great boost to Sydney. We happen to think that we've got one of the world's most beautiful cities.
And extremely attractive venues that we can televise to their utmost and provide Americans with what we think will be extraordinary sport.
Australia's share is $612 million. However, the bonus, $184 million, will not go into better facilities. If anything, it will make up any shortfalls in the Olympic budget.
If we came up short there, we were in big trouble, and that meant the taxpayers had to subsidise the difference.
And there could be even more money to be made. Bidding is still open for the rights to broadcast into Asia and Europe. Those deals are close to being finalised. Michael Usher for Nightline.
After the break, a bizarre twist in the Oklahoma bombing case and the centrefold battling for her dead husband's millions. A surprise witness at the Hindmarsh Royal Commission says she heard 30 years ago about secret Aboriginal women's business that has stopped the bridge project. Amateur historian Betty Fisher claims an Aboriginal elder told her the area was sacred back in the 1960s. Mrs. Fisher said she'd promised then not to speak about the details, but as no one else had come forward, she could not remain silent. The commission was set up to establish the authenticity of the secret women's business. The remains of a leg clad in military gear has thrown the investigation into the Oklahoma bombing into confusion. The remains can't be matched with any of the victims or survivors, and defence lawyers for those accused over the blast say it could belong to the real bomber.
The leg was recovered from the rubble 1 week after authorities had demolished what was left of the bombed-out federal building. In a written statement, the Oklahoma medical examiner said the left thigh and lower leg, quote, was clothed in a black military-type boot, 2 socks, and an olive drab blousing strap, and has not been matched to any other known victims or survivors.
With respect to our client, it raises a very real possibility that this is the person that was inside the vehicle, whichever vehicle it was, that carried the bomb.
Whatever the case, far from the wide-ranging conspiracy first suspected, federal authorities now believe that just a few men, all disaffected veterans from this one Army unit, were behind the worst case of terrorism in American history. 2 of the men, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, are the men expected to be indicted by the federal grand jury this week, while authorities are preparing to make a deal with the 3rd man, Michael Fortier, to get his testimony. But the decision to make a deal with Fortier or anyone involved in the bombing, which killed 168 people and injured scores more, has been hotly debated by authorities and contradicts what President Clinton first promised.
We will find them, we will convict them, and we will seek the death penalty for them.
Nevertheless, authorities have now decided to forego the death penalty for Fortier to get more help with their case. And today, Fortier's wife, Lori, was taken in this van to appear before the grand jury, and Fortier himself is expected to testify tomorrow.
Defence lawyers at the O.J. Simpson trial have won access to tape recordings with controversial detective Mark Furman, which suggest he may have lied under oath. Furman told the jury he did not use racist terms, but during interviews with a screenwriter, Furman allegedly referred to black people as niggers 16 times. He also spoke of police frame-ups. The defence claim Furman planted evidence at the crime scene to set up Simpson. The trial judge will now decide whether to let the jury hear the tapes. While rugby players in Australia are busily denying joining up with anybody, England's rugby captain is angrily denying a cosy relationship with the Princess of Wales. With the London tabloids in a feeding frenzy, Will Carling has been under siege over his friendship with Princess Diana. After consulting with lawyers, he's decided not to sue the News of the World newspaper, which claimed he enjoyed secret rendezvous with the princess. Carling's wife is publicly supporting her husband. A former Playboy playmate has gone from centrefold to centre stage as she fights a fierce legal battle to gain control of her former husband's estate. At stake is a $700 million fortune, which 27-year-old Anna Nicole Smith claims is rightfully hers. But the family of late oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall says Smith is a gold digger who only married for money.
Her spokesperson says Anna Nicole Smith is a widow in mourning after her husband's death from pneumonia.
We have a little check here for $100,000.
Her rise to fortune began as the 1993 Playboy Playmate of the Year.
Anna, darling, Anna!
And peaked last year when she married Texan oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall. She was 26, he was 89.
To have all this fame and fortune, it is a Cinderella story to me.
But the model and aspiring actress was more like the ugly stepsister to her husband's family. Early this year, with his father ailing, Marshall's son Pierce went to court to prevent Smith taking control of the $500 million Marshall empire. But she insisted she loved her husband and performed wifely duties, accusing his family of imprisoning him in his hospital room.
I want my husband freed. I want him out of his jail room.
Observers now anticipate a bitter battle for J. Howard Marshall's fortune. But what really riles his family, that he'll be remembered not as a successful businessman, but as Anna Nicole Smith's husband. In Hollywood, Nick McCallum for Nightline.
In a moment, the first of our special reports on the 50th anniversary of victory in the Pacific. August the 15th will mark the 50th anniversary of the Allied victory in the Pacific. Leading up to the celebration of this momentous day, we're presenting a series of reports on the heroic and vital role Australians played in the war effort. Also, we're examining the crucial moments of the war in the Far East. Tonight, the events that brought simmering animosities to flashpoint, and how our nation struggled to defend itself in those darkest of days.
In late 1941, most of Australia's fighting forces were in the Middle East, but it was apparent a conflict was looming in the Pacific. Japan had already invaded vast tracts of northern China.
Australia was concerned about the Japanese aggression in the Far East, but it relied very heavily upon the Singapore strategy, the idea that Singapore was the large imperial base and that the British fleet would protect Australia against Japanese aggression.
US concerns led to an embargo against Japan, threatening its supplies of raw materials, oil, tin and rubber. Japan was quick to retaliate.
Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt asked for a declaration of war.
Fortunately, the American carriers were at sea. They would be decisive in the year to come. The Japanese had also attacked Malaya.
The Australian 8th Division had already been stationed in Singapore. In January 42, it was pushed forward to meet the Japanese attack and made a fighting withdrawal down the Malay Peninsula to Singapore. But the Japanese were too strong and better equipped than they had been expected to be, and in February 1942, Singapore fell.
It was the greatest military disaster of the British Empire and a frightening moment for Australia. We'd lost almost an entire division of our frontline troops. They would soon learn the harsh realities of falling prisoner to the Japanese. For the first time, Australia itself was threatened. The government recalled the bulk of our fighting men from the Middle East.
There was a diplomatic wrangle over the return of the troops because the British government, principally Winston Churchill, wanted to use those troops to halt the Japanese advance in Burma, and the Australian government insisted that those troops be brought back to defend Australia.
Churchill wanted the troops to protect India by stopping the Japanese in Burma, but Australia was adamant, knowing the men would be needed in New Guinea. The first half of 1942 was a series of setbacks for the Allies. The fall of Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, the attack on Rabaul, the first bombing raids over Darwin. And now Australia's young men would face a terrible battle on a muddy jungle trail that's become part of our nation's history, the Kokoda Track.
Well, for many Australians, the most enduring images of World War II are of our soldiers taken prisoner by the Japanese. Starved and beaten beyond recognition, those young men came back old, having witnessed cruelty so terrible it would stay in their memories for life. In the face of such horror, most managed to hold on to hope and mateship, and those bonds were remembered this year with a pilgrimage back to the death camps.
They were sadists, nothing else. Didn't care what they did to you as long as they had a bash.
My closest mate lives in South Australia, and if you ask him how did he make it, he'd say, well, I got here because of Max. I say the other way around, that I'm here because of him. And I think this is what it's all about, you know, this close bond of mateship. It's very tight.
Owen Campbell kept his emotions to himself as he walked around the death camp at Sandakan. This year's pilgrimage to Borneo was his third return to the site. Truth be known, he probably visits here every day in his mind.
You've described this as the worst atrocity of the war?
I'd say so, yeah. It was just a open slab for the Japs, so it was. They had orders to get rid of us no matter how they done it. So they didn't care how they did it, whether they bashed you to death, boned you to death, or shot you, or worked you to death.
Captured in the fall of Singapore, Owen Campbell was first sent to Changi and then, with 1,800 other Australians, found himself at Sandakan in Borneo, building a Japanese airstrip.
Early in the piece it was all right, but then after a while things got real tough. Russians got down to about 3 or 4 ounces of rice a day, and what you could scrounge. They got ulcers and beriberi, malaria, all the diseases in the world.
After 3 years of forced labour and terrible beatings, the men at Sandakan looked like the skeletons which haunt our newsreels. All weighed less than 40 kilos, all were sick, and come 1945, all were forced onto a 260-kilometre march through the jungle to Ranau. Of the first group, 6 made it there. Owen Campbell was in the second party, pushing himself on as mates passed the limit of endurance.
They were falling behind all the time. And you'd hear the machine guns going and hear the bloke shelling. They boned them and that. See, the Japs told us, they said, when all party jallin', marty, marty. That means once you finish your march, they're going to shoot you. The Jap told me that. So I said, not me. Rather take a risk in the jungle.
Owen did escape and survived. One of only 6 who did from 1,800 Australians at Sandakan. The few who made it to Ranau were executed.
Somebody had to get back and tell them what happened, because they never had any clues what was going on.
Owen Campbell shares memories with 7,000 Australian POWs alive today. 8,500 died at the hands of the Japanese, a mortality rate of 36%. Compared to 3% in German camps.
Even now, I mean, if I'm out, say, over shopping or something like that, and I hear a Japanese voice, I immediately turn. You know, it's an instinctive thing. And there's something deep down, yes. I think we've all got problems there, because you don't forget. You don't forget what happened. You just can't. It's physical. It's indelible.
In this 50th year, forgetting isn't possible and probably not desirable. Few POWs can forgive the Japanese. At best, there's a resolve to live for the future and not blame this generation for sins past. Remembering those sins is a way to safeguard the future and honour the fallen. It's never easy.
Might be all right for those that weren't there, but for those that was there, I don't think it's any good to them at all to recall what they saw and what they did. Because I don't need to go and remember them like that. I remember them all the time. You never forget them.
I think that being able to go back, we should go back and pay homage to those that couldn't get home.
Is that the biggest part of this?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a duty, it's an honour, and it's a duty.
Mark Barlin for Nightline.
Still to come tonight, weather and finance, and in sport, leaping into the record books at the World Championships. To sport now, and in rugby league, West's hooker Jim Sedaris has won a recall to first grade for this weekend's crucial clash with North's. The Test star replaces the injured Cherry Mesher. North's prop Tony Hearn also returns after an 8-week suspension for headbutting. He's been named on the bench. In the AFL, Melbourne is hoping midfielders Glenn Lovett and Stephen Tingay will be starters for the weekend match with Footscray. Both players will face fitness tests later this week. Super League and the Rebel Rugby competition both appear to have missed out on the prize signing of Jason Little. The Wallaby Centre is expected to announce tomorrow that he's staying with the Australian Rugby Union. Well, Australia's best chance for gold at the World Athletics Championship comes in just a few hours, when Cathy Freeman lines up in the final of the 400 metres. Today, though, it was Britain's Jonathan Edwards in the spotlight. In a performance ranking with the breaking of the 4-minute mile, he twice broke the 18-metre barrier in the triple jump.
Edwards only last month had broken American Willie Banks' 10-year-old record of 17.97 metres by a centimetre. Today, his first jump, another world record.
Oh, it's huge, it's massive. My goodness.
18.16 metres. Brilliant, but the best was yet to come. 20 minutes later, Edwards motored down the strip for an inspired lift-off and flight.
He's done it again. I don't believe it.
The new world record was 18.29 metres, almost the length of a cricket pitch. Understandably, Edwards' head was spinning, and not because he had broken the mystical 18-metre barrier twice.
To be world champion, I've said it's one thing to jump a long way, it's another thing to do it when it really matters at championships.
At home, Edwards' wife and young son watched the history-making jumps.
It's just nice to know that it's all over with now.
In an astonishing 20-minute period, Edwards had extended his old record by 31 centimetres. Australia's Melinda Gainsford failed to qualify for the women's 100 metres final. Gwen Torrance, Merlene Ottey and Irina Privalova continued their rivalry.
Torrance all the way. Ottey second, Privalova third.
On any other day, the glamour event. Instead, an unforgettable day for a triple jumper. Ken Sutcliffe for Nightline.
Yes, absolutely unforgettable. In finance news, the Australian share market closed 6 points down today. In Tokyo, the Nikkei was up 223 points. In London tonight, the FT 100 is down 4 points in morning trading. Gold has risen 50 cents an ounce to $384 US. And in European trading tonight, the Aussie dollar is buying 74.00 US cents, 1.04 Deutschmark, 68 yen and 46p. To the national weather, and there's a low in the southern Tasman and a strong high west of Adelaide. The forecast: dry in Brisbane, fine in Darwin, fine also in Canberra, possible showers though for Sydney. Rain also for Melbourne, clearing in Adelaide and mainly fine for Hobart, a shower or two ahead for Perth. And that's all the latest news this Tuesday night. But finally, a few months ago, she was a lady of the streets. Now, after being caught with actor Hugh Grant, former Hollywood prostitute Divine Brown is one of the best-known faces on television and heading for a lucrative career, selling everything from radio stations to lingerie. I'm Gina Boon. From all of us at Nightline, good night.